Welcome to RuralStrong, where we talk real challenges and bold solutions in rural economic development. I'm your host, Joe Barker. Let's get into it. Welcome to RuralStrong. This is your podcast host, Joe Barker, and we're coming to you today from the Southwest Tennessee Development District podcast studio in beautiful downtown Jackson, Tennessee. And our subject today is one of those really hot button issues, not only in urban areas, but rural areas, and that is data centers. Are you for it or against it? And, every time I go to a meeting now, there's always sessions on AI, and they talk about data centers. And we've got a gentleman with us today that's going to get us all straightened out on data centers, and that is Tim Weston. Tim is the project development manager for the manufacturing and industrial sector at Brasfield Gorrie, one of the nation's largest privately held construction firms, and he's based out of the Mid-South region in beautiful Amory, Mississippi, where he focuses on developing design, build, and general contracting opportunities for large-scale manufacturing facilities across the United States. And Tim, welcome to RuralStrong.
Glad to be here, Joe. Glad to join you today.
Well, I guess we'll start off with this. It's I'm sure it's very cool in Amory, Mississippi today.
Yeah, it's a steamer. 4th of July weekend. I hope everybody puts on lots of sunscreen. And, I was having a conversation 2 days ago. We were talking about how hot it was, and I had some of our team in Texas on the line. And we'll send Mississippi boys to the Texas projects, and I always check in with them about August. It'll be 110 in Texas, and everybody goes, well, it's a lot less humidity. It doesn't matter. It's still hot. And I was telling them, I said, guys, when I was a teenager back in Missouri, it was this hot, and we threw hay every afternoon. And I don't ever remember it bothering us. But in an era of air conditioning and people staying cool, we've all kind of got away from being able to stay in the heat like that.
Well, we hope everyone listening is staying cool. So the first thing I want to do is, Tim, let's start off with a little Data Center 101. Yeah. For our listeners out there who really aren't that familiar with data centers, they hear it on TV, they read about it in newspapers. What exactly is a data center?
Yeah, so, a data center, if you can imagine many of the small businesses, they had an IBM, I think it was a 400, had some letters to it, but a 400 that sat in a closet at about every business. And, that closet, when I was growing up, every business I walked into as a young economic developer had a IT closet. And in reality, what's happened since that time, a couple of things. Most of those IT closets have gone to what we all refer to as the cloud. But the cloud is just somebody else's IT closet. So all those small IT closets have been replaced by data centers. And then, the other thing during that time is we just as a society became much more technology and energy oriented. So, not just the big companies, but all of us. So the need for those IT closets have grown and grown and grown, and thus data centers have grown and grown and grown. When I first got into the construction side of economic development, working with manufacturers, we called it mission critical. And I did a number of those projects, and for a bank maybe we would do it, but people were still doing it in house a lot, and so I remember doing some bank mission critical locations that were maybe 50 to 80,000 square feet. Didn't have work completely compact with servers, but you kind of get the context, and that was in the 90s and the early 2000s, and really our demand has exploded since then, to the point that, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we had data centers and there were starting to be a number of those, but they weren't at the scale that we have now, because now we typically, and there are still some smaller data centers out there that are building, but many of the ones that we all think about and talk about are what we call a hyperscale data center, and it's not just a building, but it's a campus. Maybe 10 plus buildings on that campus, a couple 100,000 square foot plus a building would be typical. And it's really just a reaction. In that building, you've got a bunch of servers, and then really the rest of the rest of the facility is about the electricity and electronics that are running to those servers, and how we try to keep them cool so that they function optimally. So, a data center, big building with a lot of servers in it, and then, just trying to figure out, how we serve that with the mechanical and electrical components needed.
Let's talk a little bit, Tim, about what I guess I would call the rural migration of data centers. Most of the time when we think about tech, we're thinking about Silicon Valley or traditional tech hubs, but now we're seeing a focus on these data centers coming into rural areas. What's the primary drivers behind this?
Yeah, utilities. Particularly electric utility is a primary driver for data center location. So I was asked, and they were a partner of ours here at Brasfield Gorrie. We do site development related things, and we don't do a whole lot of what I peer consulting, but we were asked because of our experience to work with one of our electrical partners in the U.S. and it wasn't TVA. Shout out to them. Obviously I worked at TVA for a number of years, but it was somebody, you could kind of think like TVA, and they asked us to help them evaluate, their location for data centers. They had worked with a couple, they hadn't been successful. They were trying to understand that. They were also trying to figure out how to put their best foot forward. And they are heavily rural. So it was a unique thing, a unique opportunity for me, growing up in rural environments and, a local economic developer in a rural town in Mississippi once upon a time, and all the stuff that TVA's done historically. It was a good opportunity for me to put that lens on for a client and really think about rural America and the rural South and how they could be competitive for data centers. And here's kind of the new things that I learned and I kind of saw at that point was, the drivers are still the drivers. You've got to have good utilities. So big electric power, water, sewer, possibly gas. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but, behind the meter potential things that's being talked about a lot, not done a lot, but you still got to have those kinds of things. The negative deterrent for rural America in many cases, Joe, historically has been we don't have a lot of people to put on 1,000 job plant. We just don't have enough population. Well, when you're looking at a data center, you're talking about a campus maybe having less than 100 people, initially 35. Now, look, these are really good jobs. Think about your local HVAC contractors. Think about your local electricians, particularly if you got some commercial electricians. Those jobs pay really well in our market today. And it would just be adding 35 of those. So, to me, I don't know exactly what they make, but, 35 jobs at $80,000 a year kind of thing, or at least 65, I would think. Really good job. So, as we thought about it, and from a rural standpoint, you probably got to have something unique to really be attractive. And let me throw out some unique things that I saw and I thought about. So if you got, and I know you're in West Tennessee. So if you got a retired coal facility, TVA coal facility, man, that to me, there's a story there that can be used. One, there's a lot of electrical infrastructure coming to that location. And there's probably some behind the meter infrastructure sitting there as well. If you're adjacent to gas peaker facilities in the valley, again, probably sitting on a really good gas scenario, putting in a 300 or 500 megawatt combined cycle or simple cycle gas facility, probably a little easier in your area than the majority. You've got large transmission level substations. So I'm not talking about your co-ops. I'm talking about if TVA's got a big, large transmission where they're bringing in production and lines and splitting it out, that creates some really good. If you've got any shuttered large load project, whether it was a steel plant or tire plant or something that's probably in the hundreds of megawatts at one point, and you still got some of that capacity there, and you got the infrastructure, water, sewer, all of those things line up, whether you're rural or not, for you to be a potential player in this arena for sure.
Okay, I'm going to take the position of a local elected official. Okay, and again, as you said, it doesn't have to be just rural. It can be an urban area, and a lot of our rural areas. Economically, we've been stagnant, and all of a sudden, we've got some folks looking at our county or our city to locate a data center. And, of course, one of the first things I'm going to think of, I know these folks don't employ a whole lot of people, as you've just related to. They are high-paying jobs. Well, wow. These are big construction projects, and look at all the workers that will come in to build this to boost our economy. Is that correct, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of construction, depending on the schedule. The other thing, Joe, with these particularly, I don't see many one-offs anymore. I don't see many data centers that go in and build a building. Most of what I'm seeing are campuses. So when I think of construction, I think of 18, 24 months. But in a data center scenario, it's probably more like 5 years, 4 or 5 years. So that impact is last even longer, because ultimately many of these campuses are, like I said, 10 buildings. So when we think about the construction, most of the time we're working with a client to build 1, 2, and 3, and we'll start the dirt work on one, get done with it, start the dirt work on the next one, get done with it, start the dirt work on the third. And then the concrete chases one building to the other, the roof and the structure, one building to the other. So it kind of goes like that. We build kind of 3 at a time coming up. And then in many cases, because they're building 10 of them, then they'll start on the next 3, and then they'll do the next 4. So it's not just the construction jobs for, a normal 18 to 24 month cycle. It literally could last for 4 to 5 years.
Well, and the other thing, as the local elected official, if I'm trying to sell this to my community, is the fact that many times, due to, as you said, the size of these facilities, they're placed, I guess, out on what traditionally had been farmland, and as long as they can get the infrastructure to it. But man alive, look at all the property taxes that this is going to bring into our community after this facility is completed. Is that a good sale, Tim?
It is. So let's step back and say, and I'm going to tell you, so I'm not on Facebook, but my wife is, and I stalk hers every now and then. Mainly, I try to use Marketplace, right? But I stalk my wife's Facebook, and about a month ago, there was some Amory uproar about data center coming in Amory, Mississippi. Look, and I worked for TVA. I was over the Mississippi area for TVA, and I thought that don't make sense. We don't have the electrical capacity, but I started looking into it. But they were talking about the same anti-talking points that I hear all over the country. Sitting at a conference, not data center related, 4 weeks ago in New York City, 2 guys were talking. They were talking to me, and I was but I wasn't doing much talking. I was listening. They were talking about all the negatives, and they too were talking about the anti-data center talking points that somebody has done a great job of getting around the country. It's big water user. It's a utility hog. It creates a lot of noise. It will raise the cost of your electric bill and taxes, and it doesn't create jobs. Well, let's talk about that. So, because I think I just called off 5 things. 4 of them are wrong or can be wrong. So with your tax comment, most of the time when I've seen projects, these data center projects, even in bigger towns like a Madison, Mississippi, that I'm familiar with, that got a big AWS campus, it will increase local property taxes possibly 5 or 10 fold. Think about that. Think about smaller communities or larger communities who all of a sudden now have many more millions of dollars to fix potholes, to buy fire trucks, all of the local things. And let's not even talk about, in most communities, half of the property tax goes to support schools. And let's not talk about, what the school system can do with 2 and 3 times more money, if spent wisely. So huge impacts. And to me, that's the number one reason why you would want a data center, is because of the tax base and what it does. The other thing it does is, on the tax base, it makes it a whole lot more likely that the government officials aren't going to raise property taxes on me, as a local. But then you look at the other things, the utility, the water and sewer system that uses, as long as they price it right, and data centers are not highly price sensitive, so they don't try to beat you down, on taxes and beat you down on electric rates and water sewer rates. They just don't. It's just not the way they operate. So it should, my undergrad accounting degree says, if all of a sudden you have a whole lot more, you're selling a whole lot more units, and part of each of those units, whether it's water or sewer or electricity, if part of those units have a fixed cost mechanism in it, which they all do, then that should bring the contribution of fixed costs for me as a citizen down in the electric rates and the water rates and sewer rates. So fundamentally, the argument that it raises is the only time a data center should raise your water, your sewer, or your electric rates is if somebody priced it wrong, because they're not asking for it. And if anything, because of so many more units, it should bring the fixed costs down, and it should lower the citizens' water, sewer, and electric rates and tax rates, because there's more money available not being paid for by us, the citizens, and it should bring it down. And in most cases, it has brought it down.
So, good argument there, Tim, but what about the volume of water and power that these data centers use? That's always one of those things about, I know you talked about price, but man alive, these things, pretty soon, we're not going to have any water.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. These are really smart companies, whether you like them or not. AWS, Microsoft. I think we all should recognize they're smart people historically have run these companies. And so they have, some of their biggest cost inputs for a data center has been water and electricity, those kind of things. So over the last few years, they have brought down and they've improved upon these data centers so that they use less water. So we'll start there. So they now, most of them go to what's called a closed loop water system. And that has reduced the water use of a traditional data center just 3 or 4 years ago, has reduced it by, somewhere around 2/3 if they use that. So today they still use a lot of electricity. Honestly, if they use a closed loop system, they use a lot of water initially, then they use very little water and wastewater. But I would also say this, nothing stands still. They are constantly trying to improve upon, their business model and improve upon, the headwinds and the environment and all of those kind of things. So I'm going to be surprised if they also don't figure out ways to continue to improve on the water use and sewer use, but also find ways to bring that electrical use down in time. It's just, they're smart people and they're trying to do a lot of different things to do that. And I think they'll be successful.
And I know another argument that you hear against data centers coming into rural areas, and really probably there is no answer to this, Tim, but and it's very valid, is that we live in this rural area we have this certain lifestyle. I moved out of an urban area to go to the rural area, and all of a sudden we bring in this high-tech facility, and it changes the entire identity and economic landscape of a historically agricultural community.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's just not data centers. That's just the day in and day out struggles. I think particularly in the rural Midwest and South, where farming historically has been a big thing, and we just all enjoy the outdoors and nature, and whether it's hunting or bird watching or living. I look out my back window, and just past my gate is a soybean field, and I love the fact that that's there. So we just, we got those things, and I'm not going to say it is very important as counties, in particular counties, as things develop in a county. I just think it's important as citizens that we're all involved and we do the best we can with where things happen. So I will tell you, if I looked out back and all of a sudden I saw, I think about the things that could be in my back instead of that soybean field. It could be a solar field. It could be a big manufacturing plant, or it could be HUD housing. And I'll be honest, I would prefer that soybeans over all three of those. But we just got to think about where it makes most sense to put everything we do in a local government, so that we can all be cohesive and work together as best we can. And at times, look, I've worked a lot of mega projects over my career. That's kind of one of the things I've kind of been probably known for. And I've seen a lot of farmland taken up. And I grew up on a cattle farm in Missouri, big cattle farm, and those probably love that environment better than any I've been in. But I've also, Joe, I've had the opportunity to watch farmers not give up their whole farm and still get $10 million checks that are life-changing for the family too. So there are trade-offs, and we just, honestly, community, if community leaders are if they're open, if they're honest, and they do the best they can, and we all know, we want to do the best we can for today and for the future, for grandkids and for our community. You just do the best you can, and you really have a thought process on where you want to put things. That's probably the best you can do. And in most cases, that's going to be all right with the community too. They're going to be proud, of kind of what they got. But I can tell you one thing: if you don't do nothing, I know what that looks like too. That's a downtown that's in disrepair and crumbling. That's when my kids can't get a job living next to me. That's what happens when you don't do nothing. So you got to try to do stuff. You got to try to continue to move forward. And as best you can, you just got to try to do it in a fashion that continues to make you proud to live in that community.
And I guess, Tim, and putting data centers to the side in rural communities, as they transition to some manufacturing or whatever it might be, there is a trade-off. There is a trade-off, and that's what you've been talking about. But let's talk about this a minute. Many times when you have tech companies that locate in a certain place, it attracts other types of jobs and companies. And so from a workforce development standpoint, particularly in rural areas, there is a distinct possibility that it raises the skills in that community, particularly working with your local technical colleges and community colleges and universities.
And just setting yourself up for the future, just overall. Things that me and you may not even anticipate that happen because of whether it be a data center or a tech company or whatever coming into town. Just things that happen that we don't anticipate. But, if you stay on the data center trend, well, who's to say, and very likely that a tech company who needs a lot of cloud infrastructure won't someday basically seek to locate next to all these data centers. And maybe there are 3 or 4 of them. And that'll be the thing in 2030, let's say, or 2035. So, I'm going to tell you, I was really worried a long time ago about rural America when we were talking about broadband, and you were right in the middle of all that conversation. I remember, and I will say, in my area, the co-ops, the TVA power cooperatives solved that problem, and honestly, we've got some of the best internet in 20 years later, 15 years later, some of the best internet in the country, and it's cost effective, and they stepped up again, kind of thing. So we got to continue to do that, and you don't want to get left behind. So you need to participate in kind of what the next thing is as a community, what the next thing is, and make sure that you're a player in that and you add to it. Just like cut and sews, they were really good for the South back in the 70s and 80s, but their time passed, and then came furniture manufacturing on top of that, and there's still a lot of those around there, but it kind of evolved even up from that. Every 10 or so years, you're looking at different types of jobs, whether it be manufacturing or tech or whatever they might, just good jobs, because that's what we want, good jobs. And there's every 10 or 15 years, there's a different kind of good job out there. And a community, as best they can, need to try to stay diversified. Don't be all, if you were all cut and sew in the early 90s, man, you were in trouble and you got hit really, really hard. So you need to stay diversified and chase after some of these types of things. And I'm going to tell you that the internet, which I thought was going to be the doom of rural America, I now believe will be the savior, because I work for a $10 billion construction company. And this morning I'm sitting here I've had 2 Zoom calls before I got on this call with you in Amory, Mississippi, in my office in my home. And that wasn't possible 10 years ago for sure. And the internet and broadband is what makes that possible. So I feel really robust about kind of what rural America has to offer. I think it's where a lot of people want to live. And I think because of broadband and the things that data centers provide, honestly, I think that we're going to be able to work in rural America and work wherever we want to. We won't have to move to New York or Chicago or heck, even Nashville, even though I'm a big Nashville fan, but we don't have to move to a big city anymore in rural America. We can, I got 5 kids, and 2 of them predominantly work off the internet, and they do really well, and they make good money, and I love it because they live right down the street from me, and that's the most important thing to me. So I feel really good I've never felt better about the opportunities for rural America and economic development, and internet and what data centers bring are a big reason for that.
All right, we got a couple of minutes left, Tim, and you've actually touched on it. But looking into your crystal ball, and let's put data centers to the side. Yeah. What sectors do you see growing in rural areas?
Yeah, so sectors right now that I think are just hot as a firecracker, and they provide some good opportunities. I call it military technologies, but one of our better companies is Raytheon, but it's the Raytheons, it's the General Dynamics, it's the companies that work with the government, the U.S. government, and governments around the world to develop technology specifically around defense, but some other things too. And a lot of those technologies end up in normal everyday life. But that's a market right now that's really hot. I think that they are open to locating in rural areas. They got a little bit of technology, a little bit of manufacturing. Typically, they're just really good, clean companies. We see a lot of activity in data center spinoffs. So, in the HVAC vendors that sell the data centers, and the electrical people that provide the electrical manufacturing equipment for data centers, just the people that sell the equipment to data centers. We're seeing a lot of activity in that area. We still, obviously there's semiconductors and things that typically are bigger city kind of locations, but we still see a lot of activity and solid activity in what I consider kind of the bread and butter food and beverage. We're working a ton of beverage projects right now. We still see activity in that. We see activity in metal fabrication, just the typical, there's probably going to be 2 or 3 traditional automotive projects announced in 2026 at the beginning of the year. And I follow it really closely. At the beginning of the year, I would have told you one, maybe. Toyota's really kind of already announced San Antonio. There's probably going to be a couple of more that are going to announce. So just broad-based manufacturing, the blocking and tackling kind of things, I think are still a very viable opportunity for rural America. And let me just put this plug in there. I don't believe it is. It's no longer about trying to sell cheap labor. Don't sell cheap labor. Our people need to make really good wages. So sell quality, sell a good, strong community college that can take people and move them up the skill set ladder. Sell skills and quality in the South. Don't sell cheap labor, because I don't ever hear a client go, let's figure out where the cheap labor is anymore. I used to, but I don't hear that anymore. So don't sell it. Take your workforce up to a higher level and get your folks where they're making really good wages so they can buy a boat. They can go to the summer trip every year. They can pay for the kids to go through community college or trade school or or university. That's just a really important thing, that we don't have to sell cheap labor anymore.
And speaking of quality, our guest today is a quality individual, Tim Weston. And if any of our listeners, Tim, would like to maybe contact you, maybe to ask you a question, or to get more information on Brasfield Gorrie, how do they get in contact with you?
The easiest way for me is probably, let's start with LinkedIn. I've got an email address and a phone number that I think are both on my LinkedIn account. But LinkedIn's an easy, Tim Weston, LinkedIn. I'm on it a good bit. I think it's a great platform. And I love to help people. I'm a economic developer. Even though I've gotten into the construction side, I just really believe in what elected officials and economic developers do for their community. So anytime I can help somebody, I just welcome it. So please reach out if you think I can help you in any way.
Thanks, Tim. And you can always email us here at RuralStrong. Our email address is ruralstrong@gmail.com. Tim Weston, thanks for the time.
Joe, appreciate you so much.
Thanks for joining us on Rural Strong. If you found this helpful, share it and follow the show for more insights from rural leaders making a real difference. Until next time, stay rural strong.